Welcome to CityWorks, a co-production of the City University New York School of Labor and Urban Studies and CUNY TV. I'm Laura Flanders. Every month, CityWorks explores the lives of working people on the job, at home, and in our communities in order to explore how to make all our lives better. Today, the Writers Guild of America and the SAG-AFTRA strikes. In May of this year, 11,500 screenwriters represented by the Writers Guild, WGA, walked out after contract negotiations with their studios broke down. Weeks later, they were joined on the picket lines by tens of thousands of actors after their union, SAG-AFTRA, called a strike. The last time the two were out together, it was 1960, and Ronald Reagan was SAG president. The WGA and the SAG-AFTRA groups say the strikes are partly about fair pay and improved working conditions in this new era of streaming, but at the forefront of the fight is the use and regulation of artificial intelligence, or AI. Screenwriters worry, for example, that text generators like ChatGPT are writing screenplays. Actors are concerned that digital replicas of their likenesses or their work could be digitally altered without payment or their approval. There are other issues too, lots of them, but in some, the unions say the issues they are dealing with pose an existential threat to the livelihood of writers and actors and others, and have significance for the whole work world too. Joining us today to help us get a better handle on all that's at stake is Josh Gondelman, a comedy writer and stand-up comedian who is also an elected council member of the Writers Guild of America East, and Alex Press, staff writer at Jacobin Magazine. So, welcome both of you. Thank you for joining me. Josh, just to be clear, does this mean you're on strike twice?
I am on double strike. I am as unemployed as a writer and actor can be.
Alex, take us back to May and this vote. I think it's been underreported just how popular the original strike was. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So the vote you're talking about is the strike authorization vote, where the members of the WGA, including Josh, voted to allow their leadership to call a strike should it be seen as necessary, right, if there was no agreement being reached at the bargaining table. And it was almost unanimous, right? I mean, unbelievable unity among the membership that this was something they were willing to sacrifice for and stay out on the picket lines for. And sure enough, when push came to shove and the studios, who are organized under the title of the AMPTP, when they wouldn't agree to certain things like AI and other of the key issues, the writers walked out, and I think we're on day 101, and the energy is still very high.
We're speaking in the middle of August. AMPTP, Association of Motion Picture and Television Producers, is that right?
Alliance. Is it
The Alliance.
Alliance. Got it, and they have been allied, but we'll get to that. Let's talk about why you decided to join the strike, Josh.
Sure. I mean, there are so many reasons. What you said up top about streaming is such a big thing here, right? Where with the shift from broadcast TV and linear broadcast to streaming, and from theatrical releases of films to streaming, the compensation model has just changed. The studios have taken that shift in their own business model that they implemented as an excuse to compensate the workers less fairly for doing the same work, and it's now where they're making their money, right? That's why they moved into streaming. It's not because they think it's neat to use apps or whatever. So for me, I'm a comedy variety writer mostly, and comedy variety shows on streaming platforms, there is no minimum salary floor currently. So every other kind of television and film writing, essentially, there are minimum salary requirements in place, but you barely make residuals if you're a comedy variety show on streaming, and the salary can be just whatever you can negotiate for on your own. It really cuts the knees out of the collective bargaining.
Residuals being anything back for the series as they go forward, or as they get continued or brought into other countries?
Reuse in other countries or on different platforms, and streaming really took a lot of the compensation that people expected and were used to for that kind of reuse away from writers there. All we're really asking for are conditions that let writers have stable working conditions and sustainable careers. And the AMPTP not only is refusing that, but they're really trying to claw away at what protections we have gained over the last several decades.
I mean, the last time there was a big strike by the writers in Hollywood, it was 2007, 8, somewhere in there.
Yep.
What's changed since then, both in terms of what the Alliance is arguing for and the workers are arguing about?
Yeah, I mean, what's changed on the Alliance side is that these companies who are represented under this one umbrella that negotiates on their behalf have become more diverse than ever, right? What does Netflix have in common with an Apple or an Amazon? And then Warner, Discovery, I mean, these are very different companies, right? And so it becomes very difficult for them to agree to anything amongst themselves, much less across the table from writers and actors. On the writers' side, I would say, this incredible unity that I was talking about really is different, right? I mean, the writers stayed out for 100 days in 2007. They did sustain that momentum. But right now, we're already past 100 days, and you don't see any cracks, right? In the last strike, there was some rumors about some writers were defecting. They wanted to find a way to resolve this strike. Right now, you see still this incredible discipline going on.
And what do you attribute that to?
I attribute to that to the internal reforms that have happened within the Writers Guild. There's been, the election of new leadership, people like Josh who have gotten much more involved. There's been an attempt to represent every type of writer, so comedy, variety. You have more senior writers, and you also have the people who have just entered the field. They're all kind of in leadership. They're on the negotiating committee. And that actually has a real effect because people feel represented. They feel like someone is fighting for them. And thus, they're on board for whatever their elected leadership feels is necessary. I'll just add, as far as one other thing that really has changed, is Josh talked about the residuals and the lack thereof on streaming. And I really want to make it clear just how dramatic this shift is, right? So, in the past, say you wrote Seinfeld,
right.
Every time it reruns, you're getting a residual check. When it's licensed for syndication, you're getting a residual check. And that is happening all the time, right? In fact, this would be quite often the bulk of a writer's earnings because, no one is getting steady work in this field, never has. And so it gets you through the slow months. Now on streaming, writers and actors still get an annual check. They actually get two, one for domestic, one for foreign residuals. But it is so much less, right? Because there's no such thing as a rerun. When you subscribe to Netflix, you can watch it as many times as you want. And these companies also aren't licensing anything for syndication. They want to self-distribute globally. So this has just been, all of a sudden overnight, these workers have had a massive part of their income disappear.
So there's lots of aspects having to do with new technology, and we'll get to AI in just a second, but there's also some traditions in the industry that are being challenged or changed. And I've read about some of those, some involving the writer's room, and could you explain what that is?
Yes.
And others involving how you all audition.
So a lot of shows or almost every show that's made has a room of writers, right? There'd be a showrunner who's kind of the boss directing the flow, and then various tiers of writers with various levels of experience. What's happening now is there's pressure from the top, from the studios, to write shows with fewer and fewer writers in the room, faster and faster. Some of that has to do with short seasons, right? But some of it is just they're bringing in, studios are employing writers for what are called mini rooms, which are shorter term, often less pay than their writers are used to on a weekly basis, and then no guarantee to stay through for production. So you're not getting the experience of being on set, helping produce the shows that you write, which is a huge part of training the next generation of showrunners. And it's harder and harder, right? If you're working for 6 weeks on a show, now you have to jump to something else really quick, maybe to earn into the health insurance program for another year. So the instability caused by these mini rooms is huge. I think writer-producer pay over the past decade, median writer-producer pay has gone down about 4%, and then adjusted for inflation, that's like 23% it's decreased.
But just to push back, I mean, Alex and I write in the privacy of our own room. We don't need a whole group of people with us. Why do writers at Hollywood need that?
For sure. So first of all, just from an artistic standpoint, having the multiplicity of perspectives and a diversity of people represented in the room, I think is really huge. And it's starting to become something that more and more people are taking seriously, as they should. And additionally, what we're talking about is a season of TV, right? There's work to be done before the scripts even start. It's not just you're on assignment writing a script. It is you're working in the room to really see how these episodes work together, the arc of the season, how the characters develop, and then writers are going off to write their own scripts. So what it seems like the studios are trying to push us towards is more of like a gig economy writer's room where there's one showrunner and maybe one or two other writers in them. In the room, that's a constant, and then other people are being brought on just for a script fee. And so it really is, again, jeopardizing that stability, you were saying how little stability there is in this industry already, and they're trying to kind of peel away what we've worked so hard for.
And then, as in many places, practices that were put in place during COVID are kind of being exploited. People's willingness to do things they didn't have to do before are now being normalized.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I think for SAG-AFTRA, that's a big one with self-tape auditions, where instead of going in to talk to a casting director and audition with them, you have to find someone to read against you, to read the other lines. You have to memorize often, I think sometimes 10 plus pages. And this is all work that you're expected to do. There's the expectation you'll do it for free.
And have cameras and lights and look
Yes,
good.
yes. You have to have the tech, you have to be ready. And often the turnarounds will be like, hey, you got this at 3 p.m. and it's due by 9 a.m. tomorrow, and you have to be off script. So it's just the demands that are being made. Sometimes it's very convenient to not have to come into a place in person. I think everyone acknowledges that. But I think to then push the cost and push the burden of work onto actors who are in a much more precarious position financially and with their time than the people who work at the studios and at the networks, who, that's their job, is to work in casting, and they're good at it, and and to not pay them to come in and do that is like, that's.
Well, there are a lot of kind of
ripples.
knock-on effects and cascading effects of all of this, and we'll get to some of them. And I think we've talked about some of the less well discussed, and you've done it brilliantly, aspects of this strike. What has at least gotten a lot of attention is the AI aspect. So, Alex, what are the top issues here?
Sure. So they really differ a little bit between the writers and the actors' concerns around AI. So right now for writers, AI is, I would say, not a imminent threat, right? I mean, we've all seen the jokes that ChatGPT can write, and they're terrible. And so this is not really a here and now issue. But the thing is that the Writers Guild especially has been very forward-thinking about technology in the past. So the last strike in 2007 was in part it won the ability to have this new media, these streaming services, covered by the Guild's jurisdiction. Now, at the time, there was very little new media to speak of, and in fact, the studio said, don't worry about it, that's not a big deal, who knows what'll come of that, and yet the writers said, no, let's get this in writing now, and I feel like that is how they're treating AI, right? So the Writers Guild wants to have a regulatory kind of apparatus for AI. They don't want it to be used to have literary scripts written. They don't want to have writers being hired to punch up scripts generated by AI. Now, the actors, it's a much more imminent threat. So, I mean, there are a lot of examples that have been kind of going around during this strike of one, this fear that background actors are just going to be scanned, their likenesses, they might be compensated for half a day's work or a day's work, however long it takes to be scanned, and then their likeness can be owned by the studio, right? And I spoke to an actor on the picket line who made this very concrete, and she wasn't even talking about background work. She had hosted a show on Nickelodeon for several seasons, and she was saying to me, there's enough footage of me in the role of host of a television show that a studio could train AI on those images, that footage, and have me then hosting shows I never hosted, saying things I never said, doing things I never did forever, right? And so people really want to make sure that they have consent, that they know what the studios are doing with their likenesses, and that they have to sign off every time. And now the studios have not been willing to meet the actors where they are in that respect. And I think one last thing worth saying here is that when we're talking about getting rid of, whether it's background actors, stunt people, voice actors, the most replicable performers rather than, say, Tom Cruise, though certainly there have been, deep fakes of Tom Cruise too. We're also talking about all sorts of other work then goes away. You don't need hair and makeup if you don't have real people. You don't need costume design if you don't have real people. So this is a threat to a number of the unions and the types of workers that are in the entertainment industry. And the actors are kind of the leading edge, the canary in the coal mine.
We've got about a minute and a half before break, Josh, but do you feel comforted that you're a comedian, you're a comedy writer, that ChatGPT will never put you out of business?
I mean, I do think that the ChatGPT attempts at humor have been pretty weak, but I also, sincerely don't trust that the studios won't try to implement AI around the margins in any way that they're allowed to bring in writers for shorter terms, right? To train AI on scripts written by WGA writers, to have writers come in and be paid rewrite fees instead of a script fee for something that AI has written, And so I do think, while there is kind of comfort seeing the clunkiness of the humor, I think that anything that's not nailed down, they will try to pull away from us. And I don't mean to sound alarmist by saying that. It's just like, why else would they want to leave that possibility open?
Right. Michael Winship, the president of the Writers Guild, has said that this isn't just a fight about setting us, a fight about not going back. It's about a fight for the future.
Yeah.
And let's pick up on that when we come back.
Of course.
We're going to take a short break here. More on the screenwriters and actors strikes when we return. You're watching CityWorks.
The CUNY School of Labor and Urban Studies is the 25th and newest school under the CUNY umbrella. Dedicated to public service and social justice, the CUNY School of Labor and Urban Studies offers undergraduate and graduate degrees in the areas of labor studies and urban studies, and certificate programs in labor relations, public administration and public policy, healthcare policy and administration, and community leadership. We pride ourselves on being an institution that brings together activists and academics. Find out more at slu.cuny.edu.
We're back with our guest, Josh Gondelman, who sits on the Writers Guild of America East's Leadership Council, and Alex Press, who's been covering the strikes for Jacobin Magazine. Coming to you, Alex, negotiations are happening as we're speaking. Who knows how they're going to turn out in the next weeks between now and broadcast? What are the critical questions right now as you're reporting on them?
I would say the critical questions are whether the studios are willing to move at all from what their old positions were. I mean, it was really shocking when the WGA released where they had released their proposals and the studio's lack of counter proposals. I certainly didn't realize just how far apart the two sides were, and it was very similar with SAG-AFTRA. The studios are not even willing to acknowledge certain of the proposals that workers say are actually their key priorities. And so, of course, there was distance on wages. SAG-AFTRA also has a big health and pension fund hole to fill. Those are very important. But, on AI, there was just the studios unwilling completely to acknowledge the requests. Another big one that we haven't gotten too far into is the residual question. Both SAG-AFTRA and the WGA have proposed new types of residuals, viewership-based residuals. The studios have no interest in talking about that for streaming. And so there are several things that the studios just actually in the room, their representative won't even acknowledge that there are proposals on the table. And I think until that changes, there's going to continue to be a strike. Certainly for the writers, they feel that it's 101 days now as we speak. It'll be even more by the time this airs. And they feel like they already sacrificed because this matters. They're certainly not going to give up now.
I mean, you mentioned that this is a strange alliance, actually, to be holding as solid as they are. Is there any chance that they will start dividing, splitting apart?
Yes. And that's certainly the writers, at least some of the writers I speak to, including negotiating committee members, really hope that the AMPTP starts being split by the unity of the workers. It's certainly possible. Right now there are interim agreements that a studio can sign on to have production sort of go forward. Those are indies. They are not the ones that are in the AMPTP who have those agreements with the SAG-AFTRA particularly. But certainly the thought is that with enough time, some studios will start peeling off from the alliance and wanting to sit down and talk, even if, say, Netflix doesn't want to, say maybe Warner's does. And so that is the hope. The AMPTP is a very strange alliance of people who 364 days out of the year are trying to destroy each other. And then on that last day, they sit down and say, we're united and we run on consensus. So that's not really a very stable formation. Yeah.
And the 3 months that you were talking about saw the release of two blockbuster movies, Oppenheimer and Barbie, both of which are wordy movies. I mean, these, okay, great set, good look, big bomb, but these are script-written movies.
Yeah.
Does that change anything?
You'd hope so, right? You'd think that these studios realize that the writers and the actors, in addition to so many people who work hard on these pieces of entertainment and these works of art, are central to the only thing that most of these companies do. Like you said, Apple and Amazon are in kind of different positions, right? Because the entertainment is kind of like a vanity project for them. It's a prestige goodwill arm. But for all these other companies, this is the business. And these are two facets of the business, two sets of workers that are so important to what they do and what they make and how they make their money. And it's very frustrating to see how little respect they have for that and how little concern they have for bringing those people back to work in a fair way. Because that's all we want. I think when we talk about the writers have the reserve and the resolve to stay out until we get a fair deal, I think that is absolutely true. But if they were to offer a fair deal, we all want that. Right. Nobody's happy with the situation as it is now. It's no one's goal to stay on strike forever. It's our goal to stay on strike until there's a fair, sustainable deal on the table.
A lot of communities, towns, have media production, TV and movie production central to their economies. And I'm not just talking about LA and New York, but others all across the country. Any sense that cities, towns, some of the places where these things get filmed will be speaking up as their economies get hit? Alex?
Yeah, I think that's totally possible. We're seeing it in California, not as much as I think the strikers would like, but there are certainly elected officials who see that very clearly, even if it's just political calculation. It's the studios who are being unreasonable here rather than the strikers, and they are speaking out and sort of urging the studios to get back to the bargaining table. And I think you'll see that on a smaller scale in these other areas.
Atlanta, places where there's a lot of
Orleans, yeah.
Sure. I mean, and this is to get to, say, LA or New York, for example. Josh said there are all kinds of workers on these productions. It's not just writers, it's not just performers. And all of those workers are taking a huge hit right now. And, this is another thing that's very different from the last strike, is that from the beginning of the writer's strike, the Teamsters and IATSE, so the below-the-line workers, the grips, the camera, electrician, hair and makeup, have been respecting the picket lines of the writers, refusing to cross and thus giving up their own pay, right? Because they know both that a win for the writers and the actors is going to be a win for them. Their contracts expire next year. And also there's been, again, that building of connections, and there's sort of bigger structural causes here for why workers might start to kind of be on the same side of things rather than acting just in their own interests here. And I think that is really important because, again, those workers are going to have their contracts expire next year. And so they're looking to see, that their colleagues win this time around.
So how does all this solidarity feel? I mean, we said at the beginning, it's been 60 years since the actors and the writers were out there working on the same picket lines together. How's it feel?
It's really incredible. It's really spectacular and heartening and fortifying to see that the people that we work with on set in all these different capacities really see us as part of the same fight, part of the same fight that they're going to go into personally next year, and to say, like, we will honor these picket lines, we will be out marching in the lines on the days that we are not working. And SAG-AFTRA was showing up in enormous numbers from even before they were on strike. I've seen people from the Starbucks union. I've seen people from the Amazon union. I've talked to people who are in no part of the union, no part of the industry, that are just coming out. Students flying up from Florida and Georgia to be a part of it, that want to be writers when they finish school, that are just saying, like, this is important. I understand the importance of this to the future of this career and the human workforce. Yeah. And so it's been, like, as exhausting as it is and the toll that it's taken, it is so appreciated, the solidarity across unions, across industries, and it really, the sacrifice is not unnoticed.
And this is important because, as we said, it's 60 years, which is cute, but it's also indicative of how this has not been one big happy Hollywood family.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, I think traditionally the DGA, the Directors Guild, SAG-AFTRA, and the Writers Guild go in pretty close to the same time. And it's not always. I think the AMPTP tries to be canny about who they're offering what to. And in this instance, SAG-AFTRA, specifically in the WGA, refused to be played against one another, especially when the WGA was already out and SAG was maybe close to getting a contract. And it just really feels the unity and the solidarity across those unions has been, like, really, really incredible.
As I'm listening to what the writers in Hollywood are dealing with, like, couldn't that be us next, journalists?
Yes.
Or I mean, now?
I called the actors the canary in the coal mine for AI, and it's certainly, I think it's really true that, and not just us, Laura, I mean, there are workers in all kinds of fields, right? I mean, I write a lot about Amazon, and certainly technology is central to Amazon's very exploitative, very oppressive business model for its own warehouse workforce and its delivery driver workforce. When I was in Los Angeles covering the strikes, I was at a UPS rally for the Teamsters members who were then facing a possible strike that would have been one of the largest strikes in American history. They've now since reached a tentative agreement. Currently, they're voting on it. But there were writers and actors and hotel workers at that rally in the morning in downtown Los Angeles. And one of the actors who was speaking on stage was saying, hey, we're fighting against gigification. We're fighting against being treated like robots. We're fighting for full-time work that's secure. Does that sound like anything to you? And the UPS workers said, yeah, that sounds exactly like our fight.
All right, so final pitch from you, Josh. Why does this matter? Why does this matter to people in other unions?
Yeah.
And I don't know. Are you making jokes about this?
I mean, I'm trying. I've been really in it for the last 101 plus days, going back to when the negotiations started and even before that. I think what Alex said is so important, that this is not something that's unique to writers, and we don't see ourselves as unique in this fight. It is a fight of people versus automation. It is about workers versus corporate interests, right? We're talking 10 CEOs or so in the entertainment industry make enough money every year between the 10 of them to cover everything the writers are asking for. So this is not an outrageous act of greed. This is a group of thousands of people just trying to live their lives, pay their rent, pay their mortgage, have families if that's what they're into. It is all one fight, and these are the same pressures that are facing working people all across the country in so many different industries.
Same struggle, same fight. I think I've heard that somewhere. Thank the two of you. It's been great. Thanks for being here. Thank you, Alex Press and Josh Gondelman, for joining us today on CityWorks. For questions or comments about today's program, write to us at cityworks.slu.cuny.edu. For CityWorks, I'm Laura Flanders. Thanks for watching.